evacuation, you must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Sky News, the full story first.
Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the chief executive of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace. Great to see both of you and welcome. So, as ever, let's check out the front pages, shall we? Starting with the Financial Times. It leads on Ukraine agreeing a minerals deal with the United States. There is also the lead for The Times, which reports that President Zelensky will travel to Washington this week to seal that defence accord. The Guardian reports that Sir Keir Starmer will cut overseas aid to increase defence budgets in a fight for peace. The story also makes the front page of The Eye with missile shields, ships and drones on the Prime Minister's shopping list, while the Daily Mail describes the cuts as Britain entering an era of hard power, while the Telegraph reports that the Chancellor has called on European allies to follow Britain and increase defence spending. The Metro says 50,000 babies are caught up in domestic violence every year. The Express reports on the farmers' protests against Rachel Reeves's tax changes by hearing from their children. And The Star says that a former PM criticised for his questionable claims has branded another high-profile politician a liar. So let's talk to Mark and to Jenny then. Welcome to both of you. Lots to discuss, no doubt. Mark, why don't you kick off then with the numbers and the commitment now from Sir Keir Starmer to increase defence spending, which military chiefs have been asking for, it has to be said, for years.
Absolutely. So there's a very big moment for Keir Starmer for a number of reasons. As you say, there's been long-standing pressure from the defence establishment for increased spending. There's been growing pressure, particularly in recent weeks, from Donald Trump, denouncing yet again NATO allies, including, by implication, the UK, for not spending enough and sheltering under the American defence umbrella. And thirdly, Keir Starmer is off to Washington. So this is, some cynically have suggested, has been rushed forward perhaps a bit before that trip for him to go and meet President Trump, in which he's announced that the British aid budget is going to be cut back in order to bring forward the growth in defence spending to 2.5% of GDP in 2027. That's above the 2% NATO obligation, and then up to 3% in the next Parliament, if you follow the political tradition of promising things after elections that you haven't yet fought.
Yes, indeed.
So big news from him. He's trying to get out ahead of this story. He knows there's pressure from abroad and from the right, and that there's quite strong public feeling on this topic. And then the interesting question now will be, do the numbers add up?
Yes, indeed. We'll come on to that in just a moment, but let's talk about the timing, shall we? Sir Keir Starmer asked today, is Donald Trump setting your policy on this? No, this was entirely my decision. Has the world got any more dangerous in the last week or 2 weeks compared to 3 years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine? And what is the answer to that? That the US is pulling back in supporting and looking after Western Europe?
No, I mean, I think this is another example of how far and how fast Donald Trump has been able to move the dial, meaning that decisions... I mean, if you were being charitable to Sir Keir Starmer, you would say that he was going to do this anyway, and this has simply accelerated what he was doing. But, you know, he is travelling to Washington tomorrow. It is convenient for him to have done two things that Donald Trump will feel good about. One, increasing defence spending, although it's not enough. It's not to the level that Donald Trump would like. And the other is cutting the foreign aid budget, which is a very Doge government of Office of Government Efficiency kind of tactic. So these are the sorts of things that are going to appeal to Donald Trump. And whether or not Donald Trump is actually impressed by people who toe the line to what he wants, or more impressed by people who stick to their guns, I think actually remains to be seen. But you know, we were talking about this before, how it will be, all eyes will be on Sir Keir Starmer in Washington and how much he is prepared to show that he is standing up to Donald Trump, because it's a very fine line. Sir Keir Starmer is going to want to look like he has a bit of backbone. Macron did quite well, I think, yesterday. But ultimately, he can't take it too far, because we know that Donald Trump doesn't like it.
No, the reviews of Monsieur Macron were almost glowing, weren't they? And how he corrected at times Donald Trump about expenditure and what was a loan and what was a gift in terms of aid to Ukraine. But this does feel like an offering to the gods, doesn't it, effectively? And if we go to the Daily Mail, there are two offerings. One is on an increase in defence spending, and as Jenny pointed out, it's the cut to overseas aid, because we've seen what's happened with US AID absolutely being slashed and burned by Elon Musk.
Indeed. I think it's indisputable, to be honest, that the Prime Minister has brought this decision forward, because it trumps two different reviews the government has set in motion itself. The first is there's a full spending review happening right now, which would include things like international overseas development aid. That's yet to conclude. The Treasury's negotiating with all the different groups of departments at the minute.
It could be quite soon, though, couldn't it?
Well, it will have to be relatively soon. But then there's also a defence review that's underway. That's been pushed back. That's been pushed back to expecting the second half of this year. And the government, understandably, but you can debate the urgency or not, so far has been saying, well, we need to make sure we have a strategic defence review before we decide what we're spending and how we're spending it. Donald Trump crops up, and that's all out the window, thank you very much. We're getting drones, we're getting a missile shield, we're going to be ships and submarines, we're going to be going up to 3%, and we're going to be doing it by influencing the budget of another department. So that's definitely been brought forward. I think that there's an important domestic and internal to the Labour Party political shift here for a Labour Prime Minister to be saying, actually, hard power does matter. Not saying that international development aid doesn't matter, but actually saying in a time of having to choose, having to prioritise, he's choosing this rather than that.
Yeah, we saw Mr Macron there. Obviously, we have Sir Keir Starmer going on Thursday and Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday. We'll come on to that minerals deal, which is in the FT in just a moment. But this idea of soft power has fallen by the wayside.
Yes.
Now, many people say this is really the wrong argument. And, people like General Mattis said, you reduce aid, I have to get more ammo, effectively.
Yes.
The Guardian, as well, not surprisingly, also focusing on the overseas aid budget being cut in a fight for peace. The problem is people see spheres of influence and that nations like China and Russia will step in.
Yeah.
And you lose that soft power, which has been so critical for decades, really.
I mean, it is a question about what kind of country do we want to be? And this is, in an age of America first, is this a Britain first kind of posture from Keir Starmer? But the thing is, it is in keeping with public mood. Yeah. Survey after survey shows that if there's one part of public spending that people feel comfortable cutting, it's the foreign aid budget, even though the foreign aid budget may be an important part of perhaps stopping people from trying to migrate and make journeys to the UK, might be a way of preventing wars from starting in the first place. The public doesn't see it that way. So
I think it was David Cameron, wasn't it, who changed policy in order to allow the overseas aid budget to keep refugees nearer the country of departure rather than coming to European shores. But
yes, and there's been a large amount of debate in officialdom, but also within both the main parties, about whether aspects of defence spending should be included in overseas aid. Because if this thing goes both ways. I think the big question is, what kind of country do we want to be? The fact is, most voters' first answer will be a secure and safe one. And that's what the Prime Minister is speaking to in this circumstance. I mean, I think there's ultimately that the public's views, I think, on overseas aid are more nuanced than people sometimes assume. I often think of it as a roundel, kind of a target, effectively. In the middle, pretty much undisputed, disaster emergency aid. There's a crisis, there's a plague, a flood, an earthquake. People want there to be aid. The same for, say, Ukraine in this war. At the far outside of that, I think there's, at the opposite end of the scale, a lot of concern about, should we say, more woolly ideas of overseas development aid. And tying that into a strategic interest, a strategic policy, is really important.
Yes, so let's go to the Telegraph as well. This is Rachel Reeves calling on Europe to step up. Some European nations already spend more than us, but the point is now, is there a leadership role for the UK in the absence, effectively, of America under Trump in managing how we defend Europe?
I'm sure the UK government would hope so, would hope that we can play that role, but whether or not Europe want to take us seriously as in a leadership role remains to be seen, and perhaps the only way to secure that would be if we were putting our money where our mouth is a little bit more. I mean, just to come back on what you were saying, I think, of course, most people would want us to be a secure country, but it is a question of how do you get the security? Is it by being armed and having the drones? And, you know, we have this, black hole in our equipment. We have a recruitment crisis. Is it through addressing that, or is it through trying to stop wars from happening in the first place? But I do think it's easy when people feel that the finances are squeezed to say, actually, let's just trim where we're giving money overseas.
To the FT now, we talked about this economic deal as it's being billed between the US, as Trump tries to get his money back, as he describes it, and Zelensky, who we understand is heading to Washington now on Friday. So what's the FT learnt about what might be in this agreement?
So the interesting story here, I think, is distinct shifts, it seems, from both parties. We saw that draft agreement that was put forward seemingly by Donald Trump's corporate lawyers in the way it was drafted, according to some reports, that suggested 100% of all UK, there's a Freudian slip, give him time.
If we had rare earth minerals, it would be good.
We'll see what Sir Keir Starmer comes back with on Thursday. But of all Ukrainian minerals and resource extraction, 100% of it going to the United States, controlled by the United States for them to just get their money back, and with no security guarantee. For obvious reasons, that was unacceptable to Ukraine. What's been agreed here is described as a framework agreement, which means there's a lot of detail still to fill in if it gets to a final deal. But they seem to be agreeing to establish a fund, which they'll have some shared ownership, split to be unspecified, of which future extraction, so not the extraction of things that's oil and gas that's currently being taken out of the ground by Ukrainian industry, 50% of those revenues will go into this fund, and the fund will then be spent on projects to rebuild Ukraine. Now, you can with no security guarantee. So you can think about this in a couple of ways. I suspect part of what's happening from Ukraine is they're saying, well, if we can start to get agreement on something, at least we're talking. Maybe we'll be in Washington, then we'll be able to talk about other things. The US may be thinking, well, if this money's going to be spent in Ukraine, we can jolly well make sure it's being spent on reconstruction by US companies.
Very interesting. And security guarantees was the one part that Macron kept referring back to, which is the bit that obviously the Ukrainians want to see from America. Watch more of that, of course. Also still to come on the next part of our programme, how frequent flyers face paying more under the government climate plans. Discussing that on the front page of the Telegraph when we come back.
I'm Stephen Murphy, and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
All alcohol products, not just wine, will have labels warning of liver disease and the link to fatal cancers.
Is it crazy? It's an industry worth around €14 billion a year. That's why Italy sees this Irish plan as such a threat.
It's always instructive and occasionally entertaining to hear what Donald Trump has to say on the issue of Brexit.
She's got her own way of doing it, that's okay.
The job takes me to every corner of this island.
The rioting stemmed from a horrific daytime stabbing attack at a primary school in the city centre.
The scale of the rioting and the destruction it caused is pretty much unprecedented here in Dublin.
Jerry, any comment on the judge's decisions? Do you feel vindicated, Jerry? This is the end, the somewhat chaotic end, of a 52-day trial.
Micheál Martin could be set to head back to government with the Taoiseach Simon Harris.
Are you confident that you can now return as Taoiseach?
I'm cautiously optimistic and excited.
A mystery press conference hastily called. Leo Varadkar strode out and didn't disappoint.
I am resigning as President and Leader of Fine Gael effective today.
The people here sometimes feel they're somewhat neglected by the Irish government, to the extent that this place is sometimes known as the Forgotten County.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks, but none have ever been found.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach.
This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Sky News, get the full story first.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war? Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me once again, the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the chief executive of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace. Welcome back to both of you. Shall we go to the front page of The Guardian now, Jenny? And this is the BBC. We fell short over what feels like another misconduct case.
Yes.
So tell us more about reaction
Well,
to
this is about the Radio 1 DJ Tim Westwood, who denies all these allegations, but there was a very large number of women who came forward. There were 120 people who were heard from in this BBC inquiry, a large number of women who came forward to say that he had behaved inappropriately and assaulted some of them. And the reason why, I mean, this is a very sad story, but it shows that there has been this culture of deference to presenters. And we're not just talking about Jimmy Savile here. This is also Russell Brand, where you have BBC presenters at a time when staff knew that they were behaving in an inappropriate way. They had on the BBC News this evening, they had a clip of him talking to one of the news presenters and talking about her breasts, and it was all, you could hear how awkward it was, but it was just a completely acceptable part of the culture. And so this is kind of incrementally building up that there was just a very large number of cases with a wide variety of different presenters where they were just allowed to behave in an appalling way. And I hope this era is over. But many of the cases that were revealed in this report, they said they could have gone to the police with, but, you know, presenters felt that, not presenters, but producers felt that they shouldn't because he was too big of a star.
Yes, and Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, met today with the BBC Director General, Tim Davie, saying the allegations against Tim Westwood are very serious. It is essential that staff and the wider public can have confidence in the BBC as our national broadcaster, forgive me. There have been far too many instances of appalling behaviour in the media industry, and there's been a culture of silence around inappropriate behaviour for too long. This cannot continue. So, echoing what you said. Final story, frequent flyers, going to get expensive. Mark?
Yes, so this is the latest Climate Advisor's latest carbon budget, with the Climate Change Committee recommending that one measure it could put forward is the more often you fly, you take multiple holidays abroad a year, you should start to pay extra on top of what you already pay. Now, you can hear quite a lot of people at home thinking, well, if you fly more, you already do pay more because you're paying tax and air passenger duty every single time you fly. But this, I think, it's in the foothills of what's going to become a bigger and bigger argument. As our country gets poorer, as our economy wobbles...
It's very presumptive, by the way.
Well, no, comparatively poorer. I mean, I don't think people in this country have fully realised yet the degree to which we've fallen behind, say, the United States. If we were to join the United States, we would now be the poorest state of the United States, behind Alabama, Mississippi, whatever people might like to think. I think in the next 10 years, you'll see a move from, the minute enterprising young people are going to Dubai, within 10 years, they'll be going to Poland. Poland's economy is growing super fast. Watch British plumbers go and work in Poland. I think it'd be a bit of a culture shock for people. But as people get squeezed, these issues of the presumption that climate change policy can simply transition us without massively squeezing people and businesses that's going to start to hurt.
Running out of time. We're here to cheer you up.
Yes, really
That's how
way
I
to
sum
end
that
it
one
all.
up. Anyway, Mark Wallace and Jenny Kleeman, thank you as ever. See you for more on the 11th, obviously. Next in our programme, of course, we will have more on the Prime Minister's pledge to boost defence spending, funded by cuts to overseas aid ahead, of course, of his visit to Washington to see Donald Trump on Thursday.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.